I woke up to the soft beeping of the hospital monitor, thinking the worst was behind me. The surgery had gone well, the doctor said. Just rest and recover. Then my phone buzzed on the bedside table. I reached for it carefully, mindful of the 4-line in my arm. The email notification showed a message from HR. My stomach dropped even before I opened it. Termination of appointment, effective immediately. The words blurred as I read them again. Trent Wallace's name sat at the bottom, his digital signature mocking me from the screen. The same man I'd covered for during his messy divorce. The same boss I defended in board meetings when others questioned his decisions. The betrayal hit harder than any physical pain from the surgery. I stared at the white ceiling, my throat tight with emotions I couldn't name. 11 years of dedication, gone with one cold email sent while I recovered from surgery. While I'm in a hospital bed, I whispered. The nurse doing her rounds asked if I was okay. I wasn't. Not even close. Not anymore. The next morning, I called HR from my hospital room. My hands shook as I held the phone, the 4 pulling slightly. Jennifer from Human Resources sounded rehearsed, distant, like she'd delivered this speech before. It's a restructuring, I'm afraid. Your role has been eliminated. Her tone was professional, empty of emotion. I asked about my accumulated leave, my pension contributions, the projects I'd been managing. She had answers ready, clinical and precise. Everything legal, everything by the book, everything final. 2 days later, still recovering at home, I opened my laptop out of habit. The surgical wound ached when I moved, but curiosity drove me. I checked the company website. There it was, staring back at me. My old position, posted online. Same responsibilities, different title, lower salary. My replacement was already being recruited. I printed it out and stared at it from my couch, the surgical stitches pulling when I moved too quickly. Something inside me, hardened that day, crystallized into something cold and determined. It wasn't just about losing my job anymore. My so-called friends from work vanished overnight like smoke in wind. No texts checking how I was healing. No calls asking about my recovery or offering support. The same people who used to crowd my desk for compliance advice now acted like I'd never existed. Like 11 years meant nothing. Sarah from accounting, who I'd mentored for 2 years, didn't respond to my message. David from procurement, who'd borrowed money during his rough patch last year, blocked my number completely. I spent 3 weeks at home, healing physically, but wounded in ways that ran deeper than any surgical incision. I started going through old work messages, deleting contacts I'd never need again. That's when I found it, buried in an archived folder. An email from Trent, sent 8 months earlier during a late night at the office. You've always been too good at your job, makes people nervous. I'd laughed it off then, thinking he was joking around. Now it hit me differently with the weight of truth. I wasn't fired because my role was redundant. I was fired because I was inconvenient, because I asked too many questions. Recovery forced me to slow down in ways I'd never experienced. The surgery had been necessary, removing a stubborn gallbladder that had caused months of escalating pain. Now I had time, too much time to think and plan. I'd lost my job, but not my skills or my sharp mind. I started browsing freelance compliance opportunities online, testing the waters. Small gigs at first, reviewing policies for startups, checking regulatory documents for nonprofits across the country. The work was simple, but it kept my mind sharp and focused. Every late night spent reviewing spreadsheets became practice, training for something bigger. Every compliance checklist I verified was sharpening my instincts. I wasn't just healing from surgery anymore. I was transforming into something different, something harder and more focused. My apartment became my war room, my planning headquarters. I set up a proper home office, bought a second monitor, organized my professional certifications in neat folders. If Crestline thought they'd broken me, they were completely wrong. They'd just given me time to prepare, to sharpen my weapons, to plan my return. 6 months passed like a slow-burning fuse. My savings were running dangerously low, but my reputation in the freelance world was growing steadily. I'd completed 14 compliance projects, each one adding credentials to my expanding portfolio. Then my phone rang one Tuesday morning. Unknown number flashing on the screen. Is this the compliance specialist who worked at Crestline Biotech? The woman's voice was professional, direct, no nonsense. She introduced herself as Rebecca Chun from Apex Consulting Group, a major firm I'd heard about. We're assembling a specialized team for a large audit contract. A medical research firm needs external review of their compliance department. She paused, and I heard papers shuffling. The company is Crestline Biotech. For a full minute, I couldn't speak. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. My old company, my old department, the place that had fired me from a hospital bed. Are you still interested? Rebecca asked into my silence. I found my voice, kept it steady and professional. Send me the project details. After hanging up, I sat perfectly still, processing what just happened. I opened the project file that night, reading every page twice, then 3 times. The audit scope was comprehensive, covering research compliance, financial controls, and vendor management across all departments. Every section of the review pointed to one specific department, Trent Wallace's domain, head of research compliance. My old boss, my betrayer. According to the background notes, my replacement had only lasted 4 months before requesting an urgent transfer to another division. Trent had gone through 3 compliance officers in 6 months, an alarming turnover rate. The patterns were obvious to anyone who looked closely enough. High turnover, incomplete documentation, missing audit trails, and mounting complaints. The company board had finally noticed something was deeply wrong. They'd called in external consultants to investigate. They'd called in me, though they didn't know our history yet. I stared at Trent's name on the organizational chart until my eyes burned and watered. All right, Trent, I whispered to my empty apartment, my voice cold. Let's see what you've been hiding all this time. I accepted the contract the next morning without hesitation. Walking into Crestline again felt surreal, like stepping into a dream. Same sterile hallways with fluorescent lights humming overhead constantly. Same smell of burnt coffee from the break room on every floor. Same security desk where Martin still worked, though he pretended not to recognize me when I signed in. But I wasn't the same person who'd left on a stretcher 6 months ago, broken and betrayed. I wore my consultant badge like armor, like a shield. Lead external auditor, it read in bold letters. My team consisted of 2 sharp junior analysts and full access to every file, every system, every record in the building. We set up in a temporary office on the 3rd floor, away from the main departments where I used to work. When I passed Trent in the hallway that first morning, his confident stride faltered for just a heartbeat. Our eyes met across the space. His practiced smile appeared, fake and polite as always. Didn't expect to see you here, he said, voice carefully neutral, controlled. Life is full of surprises, I replied, matching his false politeness perfectly. He didn't know I'd been preparing for this exact moment for months. My access badge opened everything, every locked door and system. Personnel files, expense reports, vendor contracts, grant allocations, email archives. The department buzzed with nervous energy when word spread that external auditors were reviewing everything with fine-tooth combs. I started small, establishing baseline patterns and normal procedures, cross-checking expense reports against actual bank statements, comparing grant applications to documented spending records, reviewing procurement ledgers for unusual patterns or irregularities. My junior analysts worked efficiently, flagging anomalies for my personal review. I watched Trent carefully during the first department meeting. He sat at the head of the long table, projecting confidence, cracking jokes with senior staff. But his eyes kept darting to me, measuring, calculating. He'd ask casual questions about audit scope, timeline, specific methodology. I answered professionally, revealing nothing about my true intentions. 3 days in, I found the first real inconsistency that mattered. A lab reimbursement request for $48,000, approved by Trent's signature. The vendor listed didn't exist in any registry. I printed the document carefully, adding it to a growing file in my locked briefcase. One afternoon, an old coworker cornered me in the hallway near the restrooms. It was Lisa, who'd worked in Trent's department for 7 long years. She glanced around nervously, checking for witnesses before speaking quietly. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hallway noise. "Trent's been covering something big, something dangerous. People who ask too many questions don't last long here anymore." Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a folder to her chest. "You didn't hear this from me." I kept my expression completely neutral, professional. "Hear what?" I replied softly. She nodded, grateful for my discretion, and hurried away down the corridor. Inside, my pulse quickened with anticipation. The audit had just shifted from routine review to something deeply personal. That evening, I stayed late, reviewing Lisa's complete work history in the personnel files. She'd filed 3 separate internal complaints in the past year, all dismissed without investigation. She'd requested departmental transfers twice, both denied by Trent directly. She was trapped and scared, working under constant pressure. Whatever Trent was hiding, his own staff knew about it, lived with it daily. I just needed to find the hard evidence. Trent started visiting my temporary office more often, always with a convenient excuse. Bringing coffee, offering to clarify complicated procedures, asking if we needed additional resources or access. I could feel the tension beneath his carefully friendly veneer. "We're all on the same side here," he said during one visit, leaning casually against my desk. "Just want to make sure the audit goes smoothly for everyone." I looked up from my laptop, meeting his eyes directly. "Of course," I replied with a professional smile. "Transparency makes everything easier and faster." He nodded, but his jaw was tight, muscles tensed. The spreadsheet on my screen showed his digital signature on 6 highly questionable approvals. After he left, my junior analyst whispered quietly, "He's really worried about something." I nodded slowly. He should be. That night, I mapped out every single approval Trent had signed in the past 18 months. The pattern was crystal clear to trained eyes. Small amounts, different vendors, always just under the threshold requiring secondary approval from higher management. Someone had taught him how to steal smartly, how to stay invisible while taking money steadily. An anonymous envelope arrived at my desk the next morning before anyone else arrived. Plain manila, no return address, no name written anywhere. Inside were photocopies of emails between Trent and a vendor called Cascade Medical Supplies. The correspondence was coded but clear enough for someone who knew what to look for. Kickback payments hidden cleverly in maintenance budgets. Equipment that was never actually delivered but always paid for promptly. My hands shook slightly as I read through them carefully. Someone inside wanted me to see this damaging evidence. Someone who knew exactly what Trent was doing and desperately wanted him stopped. I didn't know who yet, but they were taking a huge personal risk. I made copies immediately, secured the originals in my locked briefcase. This wasn't just financial mismanagement anymore. This was systematic fraud, carefully planned and executed, calculated theft over years. And Trent had been running it successfully for a long time. I sat back in my chair, letting the weight of discovery settle over me. He'd fired me while I was in the hospital specifically to protect this scheme. The realization made my chest tight with renewed anger and determination. That night, long after everyone left the building, I stayed at the office working. I had special access to archived systems, part of my comprehensive audit privileges. I started with 2 years ago, methodically tracing every approval trail, every vendor payment, every reimbursement request through the digital maze. By midnight, I'd mapped an entire network of falsified invoices spanning departments. Shell companies receiving regular payments. Purchase orders for expensive equipment that didn't exist. Lab supplies ordered at triple the normal market rate from suspicious vendors. And every single questionable transaction had Trent's authorization signature. Every one led back to his office, his approval, his direct authorization. My chest tightened as the complete picture became clear. He hadn't just fired me for being inconvenient or asking questions. He'd fired me because I was getting dangerously close to discovering this entire operation. 3 months before my surgery, I'd questioned a specific vendor payment during a routine review. He'd dismissed it quickly as an accounting error, nothing serious. Now I knew better. I'd been asking exactly the right questions. So he'd removed me before I found the right answers. The next morning, I found Trent waiting by the coffee machine in the break room. His timing felt deliberate, calculated, not accidental. "You've been working late," he said, stirring sugar into his cup slowly, deliberately. "Dedication is admirable, but you need to pace yourself properly. Don't want you burning out again." His tone carried a subtle warning underneath the superficial concern. "I wouldn't want you to overstep your audit scope." I poured my coffee, keeping my movements casual and relaxed. "Just being thorough," I replied calmly. "That's what good audits require, attention to detail." I met his eyes directly, unflinching. Comprehensive attention to every detail. His smile didn't reach his eyes at all. "Of course." He walked away, but his shoulders were tense, rigid. I'd struck a nerve, pushed a boundary. He knew I was getting dangerously close to something. That afternoon, I found my office door slightly ajar when I returned from lunch. My laptop was exactly where I'd left it, but my papers were shifted millimeters. Someone had been looking through my work, searching for something. I checked my locked briefcase immediately. Still secure, untouched. Trent was getting desperate, taking risks. The same coworker who'd warned me before, Lisa, slipped me a flash drive in the parking garage after work. She pressed it into my hand quickly, glancing nervously over her shoulder, repeatedly. "You didn't get this from me," she said urgently, her voice shaking. "But you need to see what's on it. Everything's there." Before I could ask any questions or thank her, she hurried to her car and drove away quickly. In my apartment that night, I plugged in the drive with trembling hands. Inside were old audit notes, ones I'd personally written a year ago before my surgery. I'd flagged several serious irregularities in vendor payments, recommended additional comprehensive review. According to the official system, these files had been deleted during a routine data migration. But here they were, preserved, saved by someone. Trent had claimed the migration caused unavoidable data loss. He'd lied directly to the board. He'd deliberately deleted my findings, buried my concerns deep. I realized then with absolute certainty, my firing wasn't just personal convenience or restructuring. It was an essential part of a calculated cover-up. He'd removed me to erase my questions permanently. But he'd forgotten that people keep backups. People remember. And now I had proof. At the next formal review meeting with Crestline's executive team, I asked Trent a simple, direct question. We were discussing standard procurement procedures, and I had my evidence ready. "Mr. Wallace, can you explain the discrepancy in vendor payments from Q2? I kept my voice neutral, professional, unthreatening. Specifically, the payments to Cascade Medical Supplies that don't match any delivery records. His jaw tightened visibly. The room went completely silent, all conversation stopping. Every executive turned to look at him, waiting. "I'll have to check on that," he said, his voice strained, unnatural. "It's probably just a documentation delay in the system." I nodded slowly, deliberately. Of course. I'll wait for your clarification. But I didn't need his clarification at all. I had emails, invoices, bank records, everything. For the first time since I'd returned to Crestline, I saw real panic flicker behind his practice charm. He knew what I had, and now everyone in that room suspected something was seriously wrong. After the meeting, one executive stopped me in the hallway. "Keep digging," she said quietly but firmly. "We need to know everything." That night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number after midnight. I answered, expecting a robocall or wrong number. Instead, a low voice spoke directly into my ear. "Stop digging. You've done enough damage already. Walk away now while you can." The line went dead before I could respond or trace it. My hands went cold, my heart racing. For a moment, sitting alone in my dark apartment, I almost considered it seriously. Walking away would be safer, easier, smarter. I'd made my point, proved I could come back. But then I opened my laptop and looked at the termination email I'd saved in a special folder. The one sent while I was recovering from surgery, vulnerable and alone. I thought about Lisa, trapped and scared in that department. About the junior analysts who'd quit because they couldn't work under Trent's pressure. About the research grants stolen from actual medical projects that could save lives. I started documenting the threatening call, adding it to my growing evidence file. Someone wanted me, scared enough to stop. That meant I was dangerously close to something big. And I wasn't stopping now, not for anything. I looked at my reflection in the dark window of my temporary office late that night. Hair pulled back severely, jaw set with determination, eyes fierce and focused. I wasn't the woman who'd cried in a hospital bed 6 months ago, broken and betrayed. I wasn't the compliant employee who'd been too scared to challenge her boss openly. I'd been broken down completely and built back up stronger, harder. Revenge didn't need rage or dramatic confrontations. It needed records, solid evidence, meticulous documentation. It needed patience and precision, strategy over emotion. I'd learned that the hard way through pain. The next morning, I requested a confidential briefing with the Executive Oversight Board. Just me and them. No department heads present at all. Trent wasn't invited or informed. I presented my findings methodically, piece by piece. The falsified invoices, the shell companies, the kickback scheme, the deliberately deleted audit notes. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to alarm to anger. When I finished, the Chief Financial Officer spoke first. "You'll continue your full review with expanded scope and authority. Report directly to this board only." I nodded, hiding my satisfaction carefully. The real storm was just beginning. Trent burst into my office the next morning, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame violently. His careful facade had completely crumbled overnight. "You think you can waltz in here and destroy everything I've built?" His voice shook with barely controlled fury. "My department, my reputation, my entire career." I stood slowly, calmly, keeping the desk between us as a barrier. "I'm not destroying anything, Mr. Wallace. I'm simply reporting the truth. That's what auditors do." He stepped closer, his face red with rage. "You're bitter because you got fired. This is personal revenge, nothing more." I met his glare without flinching at all. "You fired me while I was recovering from surgery. You deleted my audit findings intentionally. You stole research grant money meant for sick patients. But sure, let's call this personal." I reached into my drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope marked preliminary findings, Executive Board Review. "You'll need this," I said, handing it to him. His hand trembled as he took it. "You'll regret this," he said. I replied softly, I already did. 6 months ago in a hospital bed when you sent that email. Trent tried desperately to discredit me. He sent emails to senior management claiming I'd falsified audit reports out of spite. He told colleagues I was mentally unstable, seeking revenge for a legitimate termination. He suggested my findings were fabricated entirely out of personal vendetta against him. But Apex Consulting Group, my firm, backed me completely and publicly. They'd reviewed my evidence, verified my methodology, confirmed my conclusions independently. Every claim Trent made only drew more scrutiny to his department and activities. I watched from across the conference room as executives started whispering around him instead of to him. The subtle shift in power dynamics was beautiful to observe. People stopped returning his calls promptly. His urgent meetings got rescheduled indefinitely. His opinions and discussions were politely ignored or dismissed. The tide was turning visibly, and everyone could feel the change. My junior analyst said it perfectly. He's drowning and doesn't realize everyone's already abandoned ship. I allowed myself a small, private smile. Justice was slow, but thorough, comprehensive. It didn't need speed. It needed certainty. Documents started surfacing faster than I could process them all. Anonymous tips arrived daily now, sometimes multiple times. Internal memos I'd never seen before. Compliance reports filed by previous employees who'd left. Bank statements showing personal accounts linked to shell companies. Trent's carefully constructed web was falling apart, thread by thread. Someone inside his supposedly loyal circle had flipped, feeding me information steadily. I suspected Lisa, but I never asked directly. Plausible deniability protected her from retaliation. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same damning conclusion. Trent had been systematically stealing research grant money for 3 years minimum. Funds meant for cancer research, diabetes studies, medical equipment for patients. Money that could have saved actual lives, redirected into his personal accounts. The scale of it made me physically ill. This wasn't just corporate theft anymore. This was stealing from sick people, from future patients, from hope itself. I worked 16-hour days, documenting everything meticulously, building an absolutely airtight case. Personal revenge had transformed into something bigger, more important. This was about justice for everyone he'd hurt. Corporate called an emergency internal hearing. The executive board, legal counsel, HR representatives, and Trent. I was asked to present my complete findings formally. Trent sat across from me, pale, sweating despite the air conditioning, his eyes darting between faces around the long table. His expensive lawyer whispered constantly in his ear, giving advice. The chief financial officer asked me to begin my presentation. For 90 minutes, I walked them through everything I'd found. The timeline, the shell companies, the falsified invoices, the kickback schemes, the deliberately deleted audit trails. I showed them how he'd covered his tracks, how he'd eliminated anyone who got too close to discovering the truth. I explained how my termination fit into his pattern of silencing questions and investigations. Every word was backed by solid evidence. Every number had clear documentation. Every claim had proof attached. When I finished, the room sat in heavy, uncomfortable silence. Then the CFO spoke directly to Trent. "Do you have anything to say?" Trent's voice was barely a whisper, broken. "I need to consult with my attorney." "That's probably wise," she replied coldly. Within a week, Trent was suspended pending criminal investigation. The news spread through Crestline like wildfire, unstoppable. Employees whispered in hallways, gathered in break rooms, shared shocked messages. His office was sealed with evidence tape, forensics team coming. Security escorted him out with a small box of personal items. I happened to be in the lobby when it occurred. Our eyes met briefly. His face was ashen, defeated, hollow. All his arrogance had collapsed into stunned silence. I felt no triumphant joy watching him leave in disgrace. What I felt was calm, deep and settled like still water. Justice didn't need applause or celebration or drama. It just needed to be complete, thorough, final. That afternoon, Lisa stopped by my office quietly. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave us our voices back." I shook my head. You gave me the evidence. You were brave when it mattered most. She smiled genuinely for the first time since I'd returned. We both were. After she left, I sat in the quiet office, watching the sun set through the window. The city lights began twinkling. For the first time in 6 months, I felt peace. The board of directors sent an official commendation letter to Apex Consulting Group. My name was mentioned specifically for exemplary professionalism, investigative thoroughness, and unwavering integrity in uncovering systematic fraud. The letter detailed how my audit had recovered over $2 million in stolen grant money and prevented future losses. Apex offered me a senior partnership position with equity. Crestline offered me a permanent consulting contract at double my previous salary with guaranteed annual reviews and respect. I accepted both offers without hesitation. That evening, I framed 2 documents side by side on my office wall. On the left, the termination email from 6 months ago. On the right, the commendation letter. Both reminders of who I'd been and who I'd become through fire. Both proof that betrayal could transform into strength if you let it. I stood back, looking at them together. The woman who'd been fired from a hospital bed would have never imagined this ending. But she'd also never imagined her own resilience, her capacity to transform pain into power. That woman was gone. This new version was better. Months later, I ran into Trent at a downtown cafe. I was meeting a client. He was sitting alone with cold coffee. Our eyes met across the room. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, ordinary. The confidence that had once defined him was completely gone. He stood and approached my table, his movements hesitant, uncertain. "You destroyed me," he said quietly, his voice empty. I looked up from my phone, keeping my expression neutral. "No," I replied calmly, taking a sip of coffee. "You destroyed yourself. I just documented it." He stood there for a long moment, seeming to search for words that wouldn't come. Finally, he turned and walked away slowly. Through the cafe window, I watched him pause on the sidewalk, staring at his own reflection in the glass. I picked up my coffee, took a slow sip. The bitterness of betrayal had faded months ago. What remained was clarity, understanding. Trent hadn't fired me because I was incompetent. He'd fired me because I was dangerous to his lies. And in trying to silence me, he'd given me the greatest gift, time to become unstoppable. I stepped outside after my meeting, and afternoon sunlight hit my face warmly. The city moved around me, busy and indifferent to personal dramas. I thought about the journey from hospital bed to this moment. The pain, the anger, the slow transformation from victim to victor. People often asked if revenge felt sweet. It didn't. Revenge was just a word people used when they didn't understand justice. What felt sweet was reclaiming my life, rebuilding my career, stronger than before, using my skills to protect others from what I'd experienced. Standing in the sunshine, I realized something fundamental had shifted. I didn't just get revenge on Trent Wallace. I'd gotten something far more valuable. I'd gotten myself back. The confident, skilled, unshakable version I'd forgotten existed. The version that had been buried under years of playing it safe, staying quiet, avoiding confrontation. That woman was gone forever, and the woman who replaced her was someone I was proud to be. That was the sweetest victory of all.